Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rob Tawab La Atham, Za'achikam Yawam and Chagador Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam Kaya. Hamlakat Hashemayim Kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call Halayim La La, Banawi Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rocha, Hakwadash, Wamashana, Lazakonim Nawa. Wamlaakim Sharuchagador is our praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai, he delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. So just a quick Google search. It says gas prices increasing. All right, right here it says Michigan gas prices continue to rise, hitting a 3-year high on Monday morning. We're spending billions to have prices go up. Americans react to rising, which I believe it goes into the gas prices rising, but it says higher gas prices are just the beginning. Prices for many goods Houstonians rely on are likely to increase. It says we can feel all gas prices going up. North Carolinians are strained in D.C. It says why the oil and gas price shock from the Iran war won't just fade away. Iran war, rising gas prices fuel economic concerns, most say. It says gas prices are rising, and financial experts say now is the time to set spending. It says, what about protecting my budget from NYS Democrats? Gas prices continue to rise in Connecticut. It says gas prices rising fast in Houston could hit $4 a gallon, and which, in the Charlotte area, all right, it's like $3.79, all right, and it's continuing to rise. At one point in I think it was 2021, gas is at like $4.79. People was pretty much, they was taking the gas out the tanks. I can't remember the exact term for it. But pretty much people were stealing gas from other people. All right, you had people considering, getting bikes and stuff like that. All right, and years ago, they would say, oh, well, if someone was to say, oh, well, gas gonna be super expensive, food gonna be hyperinflated, and things of that nature, so on and so forth, they would think, those in the world would think that ultimately, they would think that, the prophets is crazy. All right, but here it is, ultimately, everyone is feeling the squeeze, so I'm gonna get a quick precept. This is Habakkuk chapter 2, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. All right. And as pursuant to Isaiah, the 62nd chapter, all right, the Lord said, he said, watchmen upon thy walls, roughly paraphrasing, so the watchmen, the men of the Lord of Great Millstone from our elders and apostles on down, all right, ultimately, we've been dispatched, as watchmen, as the guards to the nation of Yasharallah, all right, because when you go into the word for watch, all right, it goes into Shamar, or this goes into Mashamarat. All right, it says guard, charge, function, obligation. So we have an obligation, a function, a service to watch over the nation of Yasharallah. It says keeping, all right, preserving, you see, because that's what that watch is for. All right, that's why it says I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, because on the tower, you got that 360 security, and it says, and I will watch to see and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. And that process is done by 2nd Ezra, the 9th chapter. All right, let's get that real fast. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 9 and verse 1. It says, he answered me then and said, measure thou the time diligently in itself, and when thou seest part of the signs past which I have told thee before, then shalt thou understand that it is the very same time wherein the highest will begin to visit the world which he made. So we're seeing all the prophecies come into effect. All right. From, the wars, the rumors of wars. All right. Inflation. All right. Going into hyperinflation. All right. The money system switching over. All right. Because everything pretty much is going into digital, because the groundwork for the MOTB, which is the RFID chip, is pretty much being set. All right. But it says, and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. All right. And how that's done is by taking prophecy. All right. By taking the signs that's in the scriptures and lining them up with current events. All right. And one would see that, ultimately we in those times that the Lord spoke about. Verse 2, it says, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables that he may run there, read it. All right. And the vision going into the prophecies. It says make it plain upon tables. All right, so make it understandable, make it distinct, make it clear, so that the rest of the elect ultimately can understand, what to do in these times. That's why it says that he may run that readeth it, because in the ancient world, when someone ran, that meant that they understood. All right, verse 3 says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. All right, because at a certain point in time, people, they was in the spirit of, oh, well, what you talking about isn't going to come to pass, or, or that's for, that's a ways off, you see, or they just was in the spirit of unbelief. All right, but here it is, later down the line, the prophecies is coming in full effect. All right, but it says for the vision is yet for an appointed time, you see, because they didn't have the vision, they didn't have the faith, they didn't have the belief ultimately to see that these things were coming down the pipe. All right, that's why it says for the vision is yet for an appointed time, because the Lord ultimately blessed, the men of the Lord, all right, and the believers with the vision to see, all right, that these things would take place. All right, it says for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak. All right, it's going to speak, as in it's going to come to pass. It says, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Do it, tarry, wait for it, you see, because every specific prophecy has a specific point that's going to happen. That's why it says, though it tarry, wait for it, you see, because the Lord said that, roughly paraphrasing that, each prophecy has a specific time that it's going to happen. All right. And it's not going to be moved or stirred until the said measure is fulfilled. You see, so everything is going to be rushed. All right. The Lord has it set, to where, he wants for it to take place. That's why it says it has an appointed time. It says, but at the end it shall speak and not lie, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come and will not tarry. All right. And these prophecies are not tarrying. All right. Everybody is feeling the squeeze. All right. That's why people are looking at, cutting meals, eating water pie, all right, and skipping out on delicacies and the conveniences of America, Babylon the Great. You see, because the vision has that appointed time, and right now it's speaking. All right, it's speaking. Everybody is feeling the effects. All right, but it says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. All right, and again, these things are not the prophecies aren't tarrying. All right, so let's get another one. Let's get Isaiah chapter 47 and verse 1. It says, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. All right, it says, come down and sit in the dust. All right, that dust represents confusion, you see, because if you look at America, Babylon the Great, the bread and circus and, the comfort foods, all of that's still going on, you see, but nobody can explain, what's happening in the current events. No one can, sit here and say, why America is going through what it's going through other than the prophets. All right. But it says, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne. The Lord is taking that eminence, that preeminence that America, Babylon the Great once had from him. All right, at one time, America was known as, the hammer of the earth, and pretty much everything that they got was through rape, robbery, and murder. All right, you see, and, spoiling other nations. All right, but it says there is no throne. All right, because, again, the Lord is taking that eminence. All right, and they still have a little bit of, power, you see, but this country is heavily divided, so that eminence that it once had is no longer there as it once was. So it says, "O daughter of the Chaldeans," you see, because this place takes on the ways of ancient Babylon. All right, from the witchcraft, the sorcery, all right, the deception, all right, and then the land of confusion. All right, but it says, "For thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate." This place is no more being termed tender and delicate. You see, because if something is tender and delicate, that's a place where everybody wants to be at. All right, but the inception, the history and the past deeds of this place is being brought back into remembrance. All right, and it's being that shameful spewing is being put into remembrance, on America's image. All right, so that's why it's not being termed tender and delicate. All the lies and the deception is ultimately being brought to the forefront. You see, because the Lord is ultimately doing an exposure. Verse 2, it says, "Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers." It says, "Thy nakedness shall be seen." Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. And ultimately, the Lord is exposing America, Babylon the Great. All right, and in this exposure, Eve is also getting exposed right along with Esau. You see, but pretty much the point that I wanted to get is that, America's being brought down. All right, and that's entailing of a lot of things, from the economy, all right, the mindset, all right, the Egyptians against the Egyptians. All right, these people confide in a lot of different idols. Where the Lord is touching every single idol that these people confide in. You see, because the scriptures say that the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will cover the earth as it does the sea. All right, so ultimately the Lord Yahweh Shai is spreading out throughout the planet Earth. All right, and nobody can ultimately ignore or circumvent prophecy. And that's ultimately going into that vision speaking. All right, every prophecy has a specific time that is happening. All right, and ultimately, it's speaking. Prophecy is speaking. The Lord Yahweh Shai is spreading out throughout the planet Earth. All right, and everybody has that big elephant in the room, to face prophecy. All right, so let's get a couple more. Let's get we get this. Second Ezra chapter 9 and verse 3. It says, "Therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes and uproars of the people in the world, then shalt thou well understand that the Most High spake of those things from the days that were before thee, even from the beginning. For like as all that is made in the world hath a beginning and an end, and the end is manifest." Well, the end is manifest. When you go into that word for manifest, it's actually a Latin term. All right, manifest. All right, manus goes into the hand. All right, and your hands ultimately go into something that grasp. So it can be grasped. All right, the understanding. The prophecy. Understanding that prophecy is grasping everyone. All right, everybody has to ultimately face prophecy, and then at the same time, prophecy is touching everyone. So everybody pretty much is being affected. All right, so let's also get this. Let's get Second Ezra chapter 16, and we'll get verse 21. And it says, "Behold, victuals shall be so good, cheap upon earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion." All right, victuals, supplies, sustenance, pretty much things that people use to ultimately sustain themselves. At one point they was cheap. All right, at this point, things is inflated and it's getting high, you see, but it's somewhat doable. All right, but it's coming up into a point to where it's going to be super inflated. All right, they even had a thing to where, Walmart, they got a digital price tag in it, and pretty much what that's going to do is they can just they can adjust the prices to their pleasure. No, if they feel as if they need to raise the prices, you know, they will. All right, and that's pretty much a foreshadowing, or that's a prelude to what's finna happen. Here soon. All right, the prices are gonna be to whatever the whoever makes the prices. All right, that's gonna create a lot of things. It's gonna be a lot of looting, and that coincides with how Esau is putting a lot of is turning more into a police state. All right, but it says, "Behold, victuals shall be so good, cheap upon earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion." The sword is increasing in many different factions. All right. Weapons purchases is going up. All right. Famine. Famine. Systematically induced famines. All right. With the food stamps a couple months ago, a lot of people can't have access to food. All right. And then also actual famine, from the Strait of Hormuz being blocked off. A lot of different businesses not going to be able to, afford the fuel. All right, and that's going to have a domino effect. You see, because if they can't afford the fuel, they're not going to be able to transport food and stuff like that. So it's going to be famine in different places. All right, and then it says, "and great confusion." All right, so it's a lot of confusion. People don't know what's going on. They just understand that they're being touched by prophecy. All right, and that's ultimately going to lead into, all right, that it's ultimately going to coincide with Second Ezra the 15th chapter, how people are ultimately going to be invading their neighbors. All right, so let's get that. Let's get Second Ezra chapter 15, and we'll get verse verse 15. It says, "For the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands." All right. And it says, "For the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands." All right, Isaiah the 19th chapter, Egyptian against the Egyptian. It's already being division. Division is already taking effect. All right, verse 16, it says, "For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes. In the course of their actions shall stand in their power. And it's been many different examples as to that going on. You had examples to where different uh, uh, leaders and officials pretty much was assassinated, or to where a lot of different people they don't agree with the government. All right, but things of that nature is going to increase to where people are going to be placing matters into their own hands. All right, and try to off government officials. All right, but it says, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They should not regard their kings nor princes, in the course of their actions shall stand in their power. All right, and it says, a man shall desire to go into a city and should not be able. It's a version of that right now with the ICE being at the uh in the stead of the TSA agents. All right, pretty much people are having difficulty in traveling, and they are already also shutting down different uh doing the thing with pretty much shutting down flights to certain locations, or they're canceling flights. All right. But it says, for because of their pride, the city shall be troubled. The houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. All right. It says, a man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword, and spoil their goods because of lack of bread, and for great tribulation. All right. It's a lack of bread currently. People are skipping out on meals, and it's great tribulation. All right. But that pressure cooker is going to be turned up. All right. And then people are ultimately going to be invading one another. You see, because the ability to maintain oneself and to sustain oneself is going to dwindle down. The only ones that's going to have true sustenance and support is going to be the men of the Lord. But just want to go into that, you see, because we're seeing, prophecy in full effect. All right. And pretty much the world is going to a state of to where, things are going to be hyperinflated. And as far as to look forward to more prophecy, that's the elephant in the room. So I don't want to Zabanaya Palos, what does a beautiful edification through the spirit. Water on Tazah, Atham Yash Lata Wablo as well. You have a good night. Washalam Lakan, which is peace and to you all. Shalom, shalom.